Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, WEEI's John Lyons. John, good morning. How are you?
Not too bad, John. It feels like every week when we do these shows, we say, "Oh, the draft's a little bit closer." This is our last show in March, so the draft really is right around the corner. But of course, John, we're going to get into it. The big news: Stefon Diggs now a member of the New England Patriots.
Yeah, and of course, we got a ton of draft coverage coming up for you, both here on Patriots Pulse and at anyfootballjournal.com. So make sure you're following along there so that you can get you can get all the information you need for the draft, but also get all of your draft needs. You mentioned Stefon Diggs, and of course, it became official this week. The Patriots signing veteran wide receiver Stefon Diggs to a 3-year, $69 million contract with $26 million guaranteed. Now, we know that that's not the actual value of the contract. The contract is actually very team-friendly for the Patriots, but that's what was put on paper. Chad Graff was the first one to break the news last week. And then, of course, it was picked up by major media outlets after that. Of course, Diggs was in town the week before, and that's what Graff had broken. Week later, he signs with the team. And, John, just some initial thoughts on this. Obviously, look, on paper, you're getting a perennial Pro Bowl wide receiver, an all-pro wide receiver, one of the best receivers in the league the last 10 years. He is 31, however, and he is coming off a torn ACL. Just some initial thoughts on Diggs, and then we'll dig deeper.
John, for the first time since probably Rob Gronkowski in 2018, but maybe Julian Edelman in 2020, but for the first time since then, the Patriots have a player on offense that an opposing defense has to game plan around in the passing game. And it's been a while. I know. And I know in 2021, Kendrick Bourne had 800 yards receiving. I know Hunter Henry's been a pretty good player, but those aren't necessarily guys defensive coordinators are building an entire defensive game plan around. Now, with Drake May and Stefon Diggs, defensive coordinators really have to stop and think about, hey, I need to stop Stefon Diggs, or I need to slow down Stefon Diggs, even if he is a little bit diminished coming back from the injury or he doesn't quite play the full year. That's still a guy and a talent level that a defense has to game plan around. And like I said, the last time they probably had that was 2020 before Julian Edelman got injured and then subsequently retired. That's probably the last time they had an individual player, a defense really. I mean, if you want to say Ramondre Stevenson in 2022, but to me, that was more about Matt Patricia and Joe Judge force feeding him in the offense. It wasn't just that he was this star player that had to be stopped. So at least in the passing game wise, first time in a long time, they've had a guy a defense has to game plan around.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And look, it remains to be seen what Diggs has left in the tank. He is on track to return from that torn ACL by week 1, which is huge. I don't think they signed him if he wasn't going to be returning until, let's say, week 6 or week 8 or the middle of the season. I think they signed him knowing that, you know what, they were confident enough in what they saw in terms of the medicals. They signed him knowing that he could play sooner than later. All of that being said, I do think that at the end of the day, to your point, he gives them something they've been lacking for a long time, which is that quote number one receiver. Even though I'm not sure he is that at this point in his career, he certainly would not be that in a lot of other situations. He wasn't that last year in Houston. He is going to be that here because he is by far their best receiver. He has the best track record. If he gets healthy, we know what he can do. He was on track for another big season statistically last year before he blew out his ACL. He did catch a touchdown pass against the Patriots in the Texans win here last year. So we know what he brings to the table. Now, the other thing that I think he needs to bring to the table, John, is leadership, professionalism, and accountability. He hasn't always been the best locker room guy. Let's be honest about that. He hasn't always been the best teammate either. So he's going to need to prove going into his age 32 season here that he can be those things because this team desperately needs those things. You're not just bringing him in for his production on the field. You're also bringing him in because you're going to need him to lead that room. And I think he can lead that room. He's going to have to show that he's grown up. But I think the other thing that's important to point out here is it's Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel was a draw. This is why I wanted to come here. Obviously, the Patriots were willing to overspend on him, and we've said this all along, that they were going to have to pay the suck tax, and boy, have they paid the suck tax. But it's paid off so far because they brought in quality free agents. All that being said, Vrabel is the draw. Big reason why he came here. Drake May as well. But I think Vrabel is going to be able to keep him in check from a personality, character standpoint. And I think that's why I am ultimately comfortable with this. If this were still Gerard Mayo, no offense to him, I'm not so sure he can rein him in. But I think Vrabel will be able to rein him in. I think because he's been a head coach previously, he's got more credibility. He has won, which obviously gives him the most credibility. But I think at the end of the day, Stephon Diggs is going to be good for this football team for at least a year, maybe even two. Provided he's healthy, he's going to be good for them on the field. And I think more importantly, he's going to be good for them in that receiver room. He's going to help a Jalen Polk, a Javon Baker, a Kayshon Boutte, assuming, of course, those guys are here long term. He's going to help those guys develop. And the Patriots, perhaps more than anything else, John, need that out of him than even what he does on the field in some ways.
Yeah, I would agree. And when it comes to the personality stuff and all that, I'm actually not really as worried about that with Stephon Diggs for a few reasons. Number one, when he went to Houston last year, he went in knowing he was the number 2, maybe even the number 3. I mean, that's an offense that has Nico Collins and Tank Dell, right? His position coach with the Texans, Ben McDaniels, it's Josh's brother. I don't think Ben McDaniels would tell Josh, oh, yeah, he's fine if there was a problem there, right? So I think they feel solid about him character-wise. And I think, too, when you look at his career, okay, Minnesota traded him. Buffalo towards the end, it wasn't great, traded him. But early on in those places, things went pretty well. I mean, his rookie year with Minnesota, I think he didn't play the first 3 games. And after that, things were fine. Early on in Buffalo, things went really, really well. And this is essentially, I know it's 3 years, $69 million. This is a 2-year deal with an out after year 1. So if there's an issue there, the Patriots can move on from it. He knows that. So I just don't think this is going to be personality-wise a major problem. And to your other point, John, part of the reason you hired Mike Vrabel, right? Best coach available on the market, guy who's won championships as a player, been a successful head coach previously. Also, you bring back McDaniels. Like, they should be able to work with someone who maybe every now and then goes a little overboard personality-wise. So if there's 1 or 2 instances of Stephon Diggs on the sideline this year being upset, I'm not going to be surprised, but I don't think it's going to be an issue where he's going to cause some sort of big problem in the locker room.
No, I don't think so either. But I will say, I do think it's important early on that he gets integrated into the offense, that he becomes a focal point in the passing game. I think if those things happen, I think it'll put his mind at ease. I think he'll be more willing to be a team guy and fit within the team concept. I just think, in my view, my bigger question is here, he's going to be 32. He's coming off a torn ACL.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people around here are trying to present him as being a certain type of player, or he's going to make a certain type of impact. I would temper my expectations. I'm not saying he's not going to make an impact. I'm not saying he can't get back to that Pro Bowl caliber level that we've been accustomed to seeing with him the last 10 years. All of that being said is his success will be tethered to what they do with him schematically, how they use him. If they think he's going to be this matchup piece on the backside of trips, I don't see that. I don't see it happening. And I know that some people around here have already done the cut-ups and they're talking about how he can do that and all this other stuff. That's great. I'm looking at it from this angle. One, if you look at the pre-draft process and who they're talking to at the receiver position, it is abundantly obvious that their focal point is to find a bigger X receiver that can play on the backside of trips and create one-on-one matchup opportunities, specifically in the red zone. I think Diggs at this point in his career would be better served being a Z or an F. You can move him around. You can play him in the slot a little bit. I think you're going to get more one-on-one matchups for him that way than if you try to single him on the backside of a formation one-on-one where they could put their best corner over there, especially if it's a younger corner with length, and that corner can slow him down or even shut him down. I think if you want to get the most out of Stephon Diggs, and this is where I think Buffalo did a great job with him, you got to move him around in formations. You got to move him around, and you got to try to identify that matchup with motion and shifting and try to get him on that player you want to get him on. I think this idea that he's going to be this one-on-one winner on the backside, I think it's foolish. I think it's stupid. I think at this point in his career, can he win one-on-one backside if it's the right matchup? Sure he can. He's a borderline Hall of Fame receiver. He should be able to do that. But I think at this stage of the game, in this system, it's going to be about alignment, flexibility, and moving him around. And I think if they can do that, then they're going to maximize him as a player and maximize the contract that they've given him. All that being said, though, again, I go back to what I said earlier. I do think it's really important that he has a positive impact in that receiver room because that is a very immature group, John. We saw this last year. There was belly aching. They were bemoaning their role, how they were being used. They need to do some growing up. And I think bringing in a veteran like this who is going to show them the way on and off the field. And off the field, I think he needs to be the kind of guy that tells them to shut the F up if they're going to complain about their role. He needs to lead the way. So with that being said, he can't be the guy if things aren't going his way that starts bitching and moaning and complaining about his role, not if he's going to be the leader they need him to be.
Yeah, and to your point on his alignment and how they'll use him, you go back and look at his snaps last year with Houston, almost 50-50 outside and in the slot. So they moved him around there quite a bit. I think that's the way for the Patriots to do it. And I think with Diggs, the thing to think about with him in usage-wise, I think he's going to be more of a volume guy than a huge big play guy. And I'm not saying he can't make big plays, but last year, John, in 8 games, he had 62 targets. That would have been 4th on the Patriots for the whole season. He had 31 catches for first downs, would have been 2nd on the Patriots for the full season, right? And this was stuff in 8 games. So I think he's going to be a guy they put at the Z, sometimes put at the F, and when it's 3rd and 6, they're looking at him and then Demario Douglas and then Hunter Henry, right? He's going to be the guy that when they start a game or start a drive, that first pass or two, they're going to be looking his way, and it's going to be a volume type thing. And as you know, that can be extremely valuable, right? So if it's a guy that you have to game plan around and you have to look at from a volume perspective, I think that's really valuable for the Patriots. And your point on professionalism, I think, is an important one because you could make the case over the last 2 full seasons, the Patriots have had the worst receiver room in the NFL. I mean, obviously the Jacoby Myers, Juju Smith-Schuster signing situation, totally botched. Last year, KJ Osborne, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, these new additions they brought in, gave them nothing. Kendrick Bourne was still working his way back as well last year. Jalen Reagor gave them nothing. Last year was actually cut early on after his Ferrari in the trailer park Instagram post or whatever. So really, and look, I think
being a first-round bust and thinking you're a Ferrari. Talk about delusional.
Yeah, maybe he was posting himself as the trailer, not the car.
Yeah.
But
that's the thing. But that speaks to what they had in the room last year.
And I agree. And I think some of it is a coaching issue. So they have new coaching at the receiver position. They have McDaniels there. They have Vrabel there. But I could see Diggs actually being that kind of Vrabel guy where he pushes other players to put in the extra work and to go the extra mile. Because Mike Vrabel himself has talked about those great Patriots teams he was on, all those guys, it wasn't even a coach's thing. It was those guys pushing each other saying, hey, I'm doing this bit of extra work or that bit of extra work. What are you doing? And I could see Stephon Diggs being that guy. Now, as you know, sometimes that might rub some people the wrong way, especially if they have some entitlement in that receiver room, which it feels like they might have a little bit of entitlement in there. But I think in the long run, over the course of a full season, that might help get the best out of that room because you got to think, out of the combination of Javon Baker and Jalen Polk, one of those guys should end up being at least reasonably productive this year. I mean, they were both so bad last year, and I don't think they're both going to be good, but one of those guys should be able to have some reasonable production. I think Diggs can help in that.
I think he can too, and that should be Jalen Polk. He's the better player of the two. I know some people would have argued that last year during the draft, but that's Jalen Polk. He's the best fit in this system. He has shown flashes of what he could do potentially. It should be Jalen Polk. He's the one guy of their young receivers that I think has the most upside and can be a guy that could profile as a number 2, play as a Z or the F. Again, talking about Stephon Diggs and moving around. Same thing with Polk. Move him around. Try to create those one-on-one matchups depending on what sub-package they're in. So for me, that's the guy that I think could benefit the most from being around a Stephon Diggs rather. But I also think he has the temperament. I think that Polk has the temperament to develop into that kind of player. And I think he will be the one guy that I think will attach himself the most to a Diggs and try to learn from him. Ken just checked in a few minutes ago, but we've been going back and forth, and we've answered Ken's question, essentially. How much of an impact would Stephon Diggs once healthy, have on this offense and the remaining players in the receiver room. Obviously, Ken, thanks for checking in. We appreciate it, man. We've been talking about that. I mean, again, he's going to have a huge impact. I mean, there's no doubt about that. At least that's what you want him to have. He's going to have a big impact on those guys, and you hope that, you know what, they lend him their ears and they're open to what he has to say, because if they do, there's no doubt about it that they're going to learn how to be pros. This guy's been one of the best in the league to do it the last 10 years. He could lead the way on and off the field. It would pay huge dividends for this receiver room. And by the way, we're going to get into this in the next couple of weeks, but they're not done with the receiver room.
Yeah. Well,
they're
and I think on that point,
added Matt Collins, and Matt Collins can play that X receiver on the backside of trips that they so desperately want. But I think they're going to I still think they're going to take a receiver early. And I still think they're going to target one of these big-bodied receivers that they've been talking to, because it is a need, and they need to get younger at that position, and they need someone who can eventually develop into that number one type receiver. Now, all that being said, let's get back to free agency for a sec. Are they done, in your opinion? Are they done with free agency? Is it all about the draft now? I get the sense they are. I mean, they're not going to make another splash signing. They're certainly not going to sign anybody that'll get bigger than Diggs. He was the number 2 receiver on the free agency board. But all that being said, are they done now? Is this it for them in free agency, or can you still see them making a couple smaller moves?
Yeah, I think they're essentially done. And there may be a backup role player or two they sign in the spring, or, in camp, if you want to even count that as like free agency still. But I think essentially with additions, and let's be clear here, like they had a massive free agency period over the last few weeks. Milton Williams, Robert Spillane, Carlton Davis, Morgan Moses, now Stephon Diggs. I mean, they added a lot of talent and a lot of money to this football team, and they're a much better football team, John, now than they were on March 1st. All right. So, and I'm not saying they're a Super Bowl contender, but they're a much better team than they were on March 1st.
They're a playoff contender, though, and
I
we have time to talk about that. But I think now, if these guys stay healthy and Drake May takes the next step with this staff, they're a playoff team.
Yeah, I think at least they're in that playoff contender, like should be in the mix late December type team. And so with that being said, I think they're kind of done free agency wise. And I just also too, there's not really a guy out there that just screams, oh, Patriots should go get him. Like Diggs was a guy that you're like, all right, the Patriots should go get him, especially after they missed out on all these other receivers. But now that they have him, I don't really look around and say, hey, this is, player X is a guy that is out there and they need to go get. I don't see a player like that out there. So maybe a minor move or two, but I think they're essentially done.
Yeah, and Ken checks back in with the Diggs signing. Does that mean it's either an OL or D end and not looking to draft Hunter? I
think that's the case. I don't know if you and I agree on this, but I think the signing of Carlton Davis, plus the fact that in a couple of years they're going to have to give Christian Gonzalez a massive extension, and not just the Diggs signing, but the smoking hole they have on the left side of their offensive line, and they do have a need at DN. I think it kind of takes Hunter off the table, because I think Hunter's a better corner than he is a receiver, and he's not going to play outside corner here in the next couple of years with who they have. And at receiver, would he be good? Yeah, don't get me wrong. I just think your need at left tackle, and you can even make the case left guard, is just so much bigger than your need is at receiver right now. And I'm not saying you don't have a need at receiver. I agree with you. I think they're going to take one in the first couple of days of the draft. I don't think they're going to take Hunter at 4 overall after the moves they've made.
No, I think if Abdul Carter falls to them at 4, I think he's a much more likely pick than Travis Hunter is. I agree with you. I like Hunter better as a receiver, by the way, than I do as a corner. And I only say that because I think he could be a number 1 receiver in this league if he commits to it full time. I love him as a corner as well. Don't get me wrong. All of that being said, I agree with you. And I know that this has been out there that they could potentially take the best player available, and they certainly have been selling that. Elliott Wolf has talked about that. But again, to your point, you have such a gaping hole at left tackle. I'm hard-pressed to believe that outside of possibly Abdul Carter, I have a hard time believing that they're going to pass on one of those tackles. I mean, you see Will Campbell had his pro day this week at LSU. Now the arm somehow miraculously measured in at 33 inches. They were 32 5/8 at the combine. I don't know what happened here. And by the way, I had a buddy of mine reach out to me, and he says to me, geez, LSU is rigging the numbers. I'm like, no, it's not LSU. The NFL runs these pro days. the most regional team to that school runs the pro days. In this case, it would be the Saints. Like, the NFL is the one that's running the pro days. It's no different. So I don't know where the measurement changed. I mean, I don't know. Did he have a sudden growth spurt in the past month? I mean, who knows? But at the end of the day, I think offensive tackle is too big a need for this football team to neglect. Now, again, you and I have talked about this, and we're going to talk about it again over the course of the next 3 weeks. But there is a scenario where they could go best player available, i.e. an Abdul Carter at 4 if he's there, and then either move back into the first round and take an offensive tackle or take that guy at pick 38. Again, they could do what they did in 2001 with Seymour and Light. Who knows what they're going to do? But at the end of the day, Travis Hunter would be a luxury pick if you didn't need a left tackle. If you had signed someone in free agency and you felt good enough, let's say Ronnie Stanley made it to free agency and you signed him. You sign him, you feel pretty good about your left tackle situation for the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah, then you're in a pretty good spot at 4. If Travis Hunter is sitting there, you take him. You can play him at receiver. You can play him at nickel. You can do some different things with him. But you're not in that situation. And so to your point, and again, we'll talk more about this in the coming weeks, I do think, to your point, it's still a priority for them to address the offensive line. And let's not forget now, Mike Vrabel comes from the Bill Belichick school of thinking. He wants to build from the inside out. Reinforcing the offensive line is going to be a priority. We saw them do that at Tennessee. I think they're going to do it here again. So, yeah, I think all this Travis Hunter talk is nice, and it gets the fans excited, but I'm not sure it's reality when it comes to this regime.
Yeah, and I think the key question in all this is, what do they think of those late first-round offensive tackles? Because I could see that being
that's a great point.
Yeah, because I could see that. Like, let's say they really like Josh Simmons or Wyatt Millen from West Virginia. Well, let's say they really like those guys, and they say, "Hey, these guys,"
or Ursere,
sure. And let's say they'd say, "All right, one of these guys or two of them will be there at pick 25 or 26, and we can trade up and get them." Well, then that gives them the flexibility at 4 to just take whoever they want. But if they don't like those tackles, then I think you're looking at, you either take a left tackle at 4 or you trade down to, say, 10 or 11 and take the left tackle there. So I think really the key question here is, what do they think of those late first and even early second round tackles? Because if they don't like those guys, they're going to have to take a tackle in the top half of the first round. If they do like those guys, now you can sit here and say, hey, we'll take Abdul Carter or Tet McMillan or Travis Hunter or whoever, and then at pick 24, we'll trade back up into the first round and get Josh Simmons, right? So I think that, to me, is the key question in all of this. And we're going to find that out pretty quickly, because I think if they sit there at pick 4 and they take Abdul Carter, if he's available, then that's going to tell us they're okay with those late first round tackles. But if not, then we'll have our answer pretty quickly.
And again, I've been on record as saying this all offseason. I would love an Abdul Carter pick at 4. In this day and age, John, and we saw it in the Super Bowl, you can never have enough pass rushers. I think that's always been the case. It's not just because Philadelphia's defensive line dominated the Chiefs' offensive line in the Super Bowl. This has always been the case. If you can have 4 or 5 guys that you can move around in your base and sub packages that can generate individual pressure, you're gonna win football games, and you're gonna be able to stop high flying offenses with pocket passers that can win from the pocket. So, in my view, if you want to get back to Super Bowl contention, you can never have enough of those guys. And if you have those guys around here for the next 3 years and they can terrorize opposing quarterbacks, especially Josh Allen in your own division, and possibly a guy like Tua Tagovailoa, who may not necessarily be elite, but
good enough, right? You got to get after him.
Good enough. He's undefeated against you. So you've got to have guys that can you've got to have guys that can get after the quarterback. And I think that an Abdul Carter, despite the need at left tackle, would be a tremendous value pick there, because you're talking about a guy that I've been told probably 18 to 20 teams around the league have him at the top of their board as either the number 1 or number 2 player on their board, regardless of need. So with that being said, if he falls to you, and he very well could, let's say Tennessee seems to be trending towards Cam Ward. Let's say Tennessee takes Cam Ward. Let's say Cleveland takes Travis Hunter. Let's say the Giants take Shadur Sanders. Well, bingo. There you go. Now you can either have Abdul Carter or Will Campbell. you're going to have a decision to make. And if the arm length thing is an issue for them internally, then you got to think it's Abdul Carter. Or perhaps you might have a team that might call you and say, hey, we love Abdul Carter. We're willing to move some picks to move up and get him. What is it going to take for us to move up 2 or 3 spots to get him? And at that point, as you just said, maybe you take that package, you trade down 3 or 4 spots, and you either take a Campbell there or a Membu or a Banks. Now you have your pick of tackles there potentially as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. And if you look at the top of the draft, I agree with you. It seems like Tennessee's kind of zeroed in on Cam Ward. And then the Giants and Browns, John, they both have needs at quarterback long term. I mean,
Yeah.
Deshaun
I
Watson,
don't think the Browns can. I agree.
like, not only is Deshaun Watson a bad guy, but he is not the same player that he was 5 years ago or 4 years ago. And if you look at the Giants, okay, they signed Russell Wilson, they signed Jameis Winston. Those guys aren't long-term answers. Like, if anything, I think if you're the Giants, you sign a Russell Wilson or a Jameis Winston, and you have Shedeur Sanders sit behind them for a year and develop, or at least half a year, very similar to what the Patriots did with Jacoby Brissett and Drake May. So I think at a minimum, one of those 2 teams is going to take a quarterback. And I don't know if we'll see 3 quarterbacks in the top 3, again, even though all 3 teams have a need there. But I think you're going to be at pick 4 with either Carter or Hunter. And I lean a little bit more towards Carter being available, because I think if you're Cleveland, you either take a quarterback or Hunter because you have Myles Garrett. I don't know if you want to take another defensive end right away. And if you're the Giants, you have Malik Neighbors, so maybe you lean towards taking Carter in that spot. But I think they ultimately take Sanders anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I think the allure of taking a Travis Hunter is going to be a lot to pass up. But assuming he's there, I still don't see a scenario where he's there. Either him or Carter could be there, but I don't think both will be there.
And Cleveland has shown a propensity, and I know it's not all the same GMs and coaches, but in this ownership group, to take or go after the flashy guy, right? They drafted Johnny Manziel. They traded for Odell Beckham, right? They've gone after some of those higher profile, bigger names.
The Haslams, right. The Haslams want to endear themselves to the fan base. There's a possibility there that they could be getting a new stadium now in the next few years. They want to put a winning product on the field. That's always been a directionless franchise, or they don't know how to go about it. On the one hand, they've had people there that have understood how to go about it and have drafted accordingly and have emphasized building from the inside out. That's why you drafted Joe Thomas and Myles Garrett. But on the flip side, to your point, they've also tried to add that flashy player that will give them some, quote, credibility. But in the end, you're not winning, so what does it matter? I mean, an Odell Beckham Jr. wasn't going to make them a Super Bowl contender. Maybe in some people's eyes he would have, but ultimately it's Cleveland. You're on the lake. You're still better off winning the old-fashioned way, running the football, playing good defense, winning with your offensive and defensive line, and smart quarterback play. They've got a guy in Stefanski who gets that, but they haven't been able to do that. All of a sudden now this has turned into Brown's Pulse, so I want to I want to back off there. We do have another comment that has come in. It's Ken again. Ken is up and early on this Sunday morning joining us. What are your thoughts on Bentley getting released on Friday despite being a captain? Stop stealing our segues, Ken. All right? That's the next topic. Thanks for checking in, Ken. I'm only kidding with you, of course. We do appreciate that. Glad you brought it up. Before we answer Ken's question and get into that topic, I do want to remind you that you are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by my partner, WEEI's John Lyons, and let's use Kent's question as the segue, John. Patriots releasing Juwan Bentley on Friday. In my opinion, it's not a surprise. You're talking about a guy coming off an injury, only played in a couple of games last year, finished the season with 12 tackles. He's coming off an injury, did sign a 2-year deal last year for north of $13 million. So, opportunity to save some money. Guy that might not necessarily be a scheme fit in terms of what they're looking to do. You added Spillane. You've added some depth at linebacker. They re-signed Christian Ellis. I don't think it's much of a surprise. They've got a lot of money invested in that position. If he's not a scheme fit, I didn't see him sticking around, and as it turns out, he's not.
I'm a little bit surprised by it for a couple reasons. One, if you look at the depth in their linebacking group, I mean, I think the Spillane addition's a really good one. And I think if you put Spillane next to Bentley as part of a rotation with Tavai, you have at least a solid group there. So now you're at Spillane and Tavai, and I know they re-signed Ellis, but to me, that's a special teams type player and maybe a rotational defensive piece. So you're kind of thin at linebacker. I think this is something we're going to get into in the coming weeks. That's a spot where an early day 3 pick I think you're going to see is linebacker. But I was a little bit surprised because I thought coming back from the injury, they'd at least give him a training camp to see if he could fit in the defense and if he had his full explosiveness and power back from before he got hurt. Because remember, I mean, you and I covered this in all our post-game shows. After he got hurt, their run defense went through the floor. I mean, they were terrible. So I know it's a different scheme. I know they trend towards smaller, more agile linebackers like a Spillane, but I would have kept him around at least for training camp to see if he could fit in. And I wouldn't be surprised, John, post June 1st, the money's a lot different. If maybe Jelani Tavai is part of that reshuffling as well. His money changes quite a bit after June 1st. So this linebacking group could look quite a bit different come August 30th at the end of training camp cuts.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that it's not just scheme fit. I do think that in his eyes, talking about Mike Vrabel, he wants to change. He wants to turn the roster over, but he wants to reset the culture. He wants to reset who the leaders are going to be. What's the leadership group going to look like? And again, this is not a knock on Belichick. A lot of these guys that we're talking about are Belichick guys. There are still plenty of Belichick guys on the roster. They didn't turn the roster over that much last offseason. So I think he's looking at this and saying, well, he's not a scheme fit. He's coming off injury. He's a bit expensive for an inside linebacker. We want to go in a different direction from a cultural leadership standpoint. And again, Juwan Bentley was a terrific teammate, terrific leader on the team. So this is not a knock on him by any means. But I think that scheme, culture change, leadership change, I think all of those things factored into this decision. And it's sad to see him go. I mean, he did win a Super Bowl here. He was a third-round pick out of Purdue in 2018. And then, of course, the only guy left now is Joe Cardona from the Super Bowl years, which is crazy. It's hard to believe. But in many ways, John, and I've said this organization has needed the reset. We're far enough removed now from the dynasty years where this needs to happen. And again, I know that some of these decisions aren't popular. It's not popular to cut a David Andrews. It's not popular to cut a Juwan Bentley. It's not popular to move on from a Dietrich Wise or a Jonathan Jones, because again, these guys were the last of the Mohicans, if you will, when it comes to the dynasty. But again, you've got to move on from those years now, because you don't want to become what the San Francisco 49ers became in the 90s, especially mid to late 90s, where they had sporadic success, but then they completely fell apart and did nothing in the early to mid 2000s until Shanahan and Lynch got there later on. So again, I think it's important to kind of move on from certain guys, reset the roster, reset the culture, and see if you can potentially start a new dynasty run or a new run in general.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of this. And if you look at some of the guys that have departed, Bentley, David Andrews, Jonathan Jones, Dietrich Wise, Super Bowl champions, homegrown New England players, and really, from all indications, good guys and good leaders. So it's not like, hey, these guys are a problem, let's move on. I think it's just a case of Mike Vrabel saying, hey, this team went 4-13 under Bill Belichick. They followed it up by 4-13 under Gerard Mayo. I want to totally reset things kind of at the top of the roster, not just talent-wise, like signing Milton Williams and Carlton Davis, but leadership-wise as well. And it is something that if you look at the guys they brought in, right? So we're talking about the guys that they got rid of. You look at the guys they brought in, Milton Williams, Super Bowl champion, Carlton Davis, Super Bowl champion, and a guy who last year was on the #1 seed with the Detroit Lions. So you bring in some guys, Morgan Moses, not a Super Bowl champion, but 13-year vet, right? Been around a long time. Guys that understand, John, what it really takes to win. Even Stephon Diggs, not a Super Bowl champion, but played in the AFC Championship game, gone in deep into the playoffs multiple times. So I think they've moved on from some of those Patriots championship level guys, but they've brought in other what they view as championship level guys to see maybe if they'll just, at their stages of their careers, mesh a little bit better with the new program Mike Vrabel is trying to institute.
Yeah, and look, that's a fact of life in football. It doesn't matter what the level is, whether it be high school, college, or the NFL. Inevitably, when you take a job, you're going to bring in your own staff. people that are going to buy into you and your philosophy. You're going to reshuffle the roster. You're going to move players around. You're going to do different things. Some guys that have been elected captains, you may take those captaincies away and elect new captains. A lot goes on behind the scenes when a coach takes over a program. And again, this applies to any level of football. And so what Vrabel is doing now with the Patriots is actually pretty common. It's what he should be doing, because I think one of the problems that happened last year, aside from Mayo's lack of experience and him perhaps not being ready, the other thing I think that happened was they didn't change anything. They tried to get by on the Belichick way of life, on Belichick's systems. There was really no change. Yeah, they brought in Van Pelt, and he brought in more of a modern West Coast offense approach offensively, but you didn't change anything defensively. The scheme was pretty much the same. You kept a lot of the coaches. You committed to a lot of the players that Belichick had picked. So I think Vrabel comes into this situation and says, well, what are we doing here? Are we serious about rebuilding this team and getting back to contention or not? Because if we are, we need to start moving on from some of these players. We need to reset the coaching staff. We need to bring in a new philosophy, new approach, particularly on defense. At the end of the day, this is how you have to do it to be successful. So he's doing it the way you should do it. You and I know that. We both coached. We both have been on staffs where there's been turnover. You have to do it this way in order to do it the right way.
Yeah, and I would add, too, I think last year with the Patriots, there was way too much comfort, especially in the offseason and early in the
100%.
year. The way that Gerard Mayo carried himself, even the way Elliot Wolf, I mean, we all remember that less of a hard-ass vibe quote, right?
Yeah.
But even
well, that was part of the problem, John, and you and I talked about this a ton, right? They were more focused on being anti-Belichick than rebuilding the franchise and doing it a different way.
Yeah, and I think to the comfort point, so you're those two examples, but like Matthew Judon kind of loafing around at training camp, then getting into a public argument with Gerard Mayo, right? Kayshon Boutte and Jalen Polk complaining about play calling or targets or whatever, even though they're not producing. Like, we just saw a lot of guys that felt like they were too comfortable. And I think this is a message to the group. And I don't necessarily think Jonathan Jones and Bentley and Wise were guys like that, but it does send a message to all the players here that you shouldn't just be comfortable, right? You should be pushing to get yourself and the team to that next level. So I think it's kind of an offshoot of them making these changes. It's opposite of last year where it felt like just way too many guys were too comfortable.
Yeah, I agree. Ken checks back in. I understand Vrabel bringing in a new culture in New England by removing the veterans, but how much do you think these new faces will impact the team in 2025? Well, obviously they're going to have a great impact, both on the field in terms of their play, but also in the locker room. And again, I think it's look, we're not saying that, they needed to get rid of all of these guys, that they were bums, that they weren't good players anymore. That we're not saying that at all. What we're simply saying is that if you want the New England Patriots to contend again, what Vrabel is doing needed to happen. End of story. We all love dealing with Jonathan Jones. We all love dealing with Dietrich Wise. That they're tremendous pros on and off the field. Same thing with David Andrews. Same thing with Juwan Bentley. But at the end of the day, if the Patriots are going to get back to contender status, this roster needed a reset. You needed an infusion of talent. You had the cap space to do it. They've done it. Now you need to follow it up with a good draft. You needed to reset with the coaching staff. You needed to bring in a new approach. I think it's more so on defense. As much as the offense has struggled in recent years, John, I think they needed more of this philosophical reset on defense, because as well as they played at times the last 5 years on defense, their lack of pressure, their inability to generate pressure schematically or with individual talent became a real problem for them, especially down the stretch. So, again, I think what Vrabel is doing here is a byproduct of a coaching change. It's not a surprise to anyone. And look, Joe Cardona is now the last one left from those dynasty teams. Who knows what's going to happen with him? But yeah, I think that Vrabel has come into this and said, I've never coached under Belichick. I played for Belichick. I've never coached under Belichick. He did it his way. I'm going to do it my way. And I've always said, John, if you're going to take over as a head football coach at any level, if you're not willing to do it your way, then get the hell out. Don't do it at all. Because if you're not willing to do it the way you want to do it, then why the hell are you doing it? Go do something else with your life, because being a head football coach isn't for you if you're not willing to do it your way and put your stamp on it.
And I think one last piece of this too, some of this is kind of the natural progression of the NFL where they won Super Bowl 53 in 2018. I mean, we're talking these guys were 7, 8, 10 years in the league. They were older players like Jonathan Jones, over 30, right? Wise getting up there, even Bentley, the youngest of the group, still been in the league 7 years. So just when you get to that point, guys usually don't stick around with teams for more than 5 years, let alone 7, 8, 10 years.
Yeah. And most guys, let's be honest now, this is when it comes to guys you've drafted, unless they're a franchise quarterback or a franchise left tackle or possibly a shutdown corner, realistically speaking, most guys on average get 2 contracts from the team that drafted them, their rookie deal and their first real deal. They don't get a third deal with that team unless, again, they fit that criteria: franchise quarterback, franchise left tackle, perhaps shutdown corner, maybe a big play receiver, perhaps. But realistically speaking, most guys around the league get 2 contracts with one team before they have to go somewhere else to get their third, possibly fourth, and beyond. So, again, my point is you've gotten just about that out of these guys. You got 3 contracts out of Jones. You got a couple of contracts out of Bentley, 3 contracts out of Andrews. That's what you should get out of guys on average.
Yeah, and I think again, so it goes to the natural progression. Like if Mike Vrabel was taking over as head coach in 2021, probably doesn't get rid of Jonathan Jones or Dietrich Wise, right? But it's the combination of they've had back-to-back down years. These guys were all with the previous 2 regimes. They're getting older in their careers. And also from their perspective, like if you're Jonathan Jones or Dietrich Wise, you probably have a much better chance to win a Super Bowl going to Washington than you do staying in New England. So also from their perspective, I think it made some sense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And good for them that they're able to continue to play together for another year and to do it on the same team. So, and kudos to the Commanders. I mean, they looked at both of these guys and said, you know what? Dietrich Wise can be a rotational piece up front. He can play for us on first and second down. He can give you a little bit of juice too as an interior defensive lineman in sub packages. And then Jonathan Jones, he can play in the slot as a nickel corner or even a dime corner. He could play some safety too and some 3 safety packages. So both of them are still players that have value. And for a team like the Commanders, who are on the precipice of being a Super Bowl contender, if not already a Super Bowl contender, 2 guys that have won championships like that can add a lot to your locker room, and they could still give you something on the field, which I think is important. All right, we're going to shift gears here now and talk a little bit about the NFL draft, and we're going to continue with our positional previews. And this week we're going to preview the back 7, linebacker, safety, and cornerback. I'm kind of lumping them all in together because over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to focus primarily on offensive tackle, wide receiver, and other positions. But let's start with linebacker. You made this point earlier, John, and I agree with you. I do think they're a linebacker short. I do think it's an area they're going to need to address. They're going to need to find guys that fit what they want to do schematically. Here's the thing with linebacker. Linebacker's been an interesting position in the NFL draft, especially in recent years. It is not a position that teams typically prioritize in the first round. We've seen first-round inside linebackers, off-ball linebackers go in recent years, but it's not a priority position. It's typically more of a priority position from rounds 2 through 5 and beyond. But when you look at this draft, it's a solid group at inside or off-ball linebacker, and there's a lot of value there in those rounds. When I think about who they could target potentially in this draft, I think he probably goes in the second round, but a guy like Jahad Campbell from Alabama comes to mind. Certainly a player that I think has a lot of value. Again, probably maybe at the latest you get him early third, but I think he's going to go before that. Nick Martin out of Oklahoma State, I think could potentially be a pretty good fit for them as well. Carson Bruner out of Washington. Of course, his dad, Mark Bruner, the tight end, played there, and he's a Vrabel kind of guy, kind of player that I think Vrabel would like in terms of what he could do as an off-the-ball linebacker. And then I think you're getting into day 3 now with some of the other guys that are on the list. But just some thoughts on linebacker and what would you like to see them do?
Yeah, so for me, I think the linebacker group, it's not a top of the list need like, say, left tackle or figuring out left guard or X receiver, but I think it is a need. And I think the word that I'm looking for is a little bit more speed in that linebacking group. And Spillane brings it, but I think I just want another piece there that has some speed. But really, John, I wouldn't be shocked if they bring in two linebackers in this draft. Maybe one they actually draft and another one they signed as an undrafted free agent, because in addition to wanting some speed, I would like one guy in that kind of Bentley mold, bigger guy that you can depend on rushing downs. Now, in Terrell Williams and Mike Vrabel's defense, a guy like Bentley or that type of linebacker isn't going to be a 3-down player, but I still want a guy like that in the group for certain situations, that when needed. So I think it's a need. I think to me, I look at that 4th-round pick they have, and that might be, or maybe that 2nd, 3rd-round pick they have in the Matt Judon trade from Atlanta. Maybe that could be where they take a linebacker if there's a guy they really like. Of course, as you know, my favorite linebacker in this draft would have been Deontay Lawson out of Alabama, but he decided to go back to school. So that'll have to be Patriots Pulse in 2026. I'll talk about him. So, but I think it's going to be a guy really with that 4th-round pick and then maybe an undrafted free agent as well.
Yeah, and again, I think speed's the name of the game. When I think about a guy that could be a good scheme fit for them potentially, Eugene Asante out of Auburn. Guy's about 6'1", 225, 230, can play off the ball, can play on the ball. You can use him in a mug technique. You can and drop him in simulated pressure. You could also walk him up and bring him off the edge. Those are the kind of guys that they're going to target when we talk about off-ball linebackers, guys that can move around, kind of like a Dante Hightower. Now, none of these guys have that size that a Dante Hightower had, talking about a guy who was, 6'4", 240, 250 pounds. They're not that guy. But that guy is a defensive end in this scheme in a lot of ways, or a situational pass rusher. They're going to play more off-the-ball linebacker types, but they're going to want guys that, especially in nickel packages, can match up. So they're going to want linebackers that could perhaps match up against a tight end, either in man coverage or in match zone, or perhaps marry a back out of the backfield. Those are the kind of guys that they're going to be looking for in this scheme. And there are plenty of those guys in this draft. Again, this draft is littered with off-ball types that are athletic, that can match up. And that's where the game is going nowadays, by the way. I mean, as much as, we talk about how much teams are nickel and dime, teams are still primarily a nickel, and teams aren't playing with more 2 linebacker fronts. They're playing more 4-2 boxes. So I agree with you. I think this is going to be more of a position of need for them than people think. And I do think they could, like you said, and I agree wholeheartedly, could walk away from this draft with 2 off-the-ball linebackers. Again, there's talent there, but if you want a guy like a Jahad Campbell who could perhaps be the best in the group, you're probably going to have to take that guy on day 2 with one of those 3 picks. Or perhaps if you acquire another pick in a trade, perhaps, again, you could take him day 2 with one of those picks as well. Ken checks back in with this current team. Does New England have a chance at 8 or 9 wins? We have the rest of the offseason to talk about that, Ken.
I do like, by the way, one name to watch at linebacker, Barrett Carter out of Clemson. Feels like he's going to add a little bit of muscle there. He's 230, so he's not tiny, but that's a guy that I could see being in the 4th round. Pretty athletic guy, too.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, there's a lot of those guys in this draft that fit that mold. So I do think from a scheme standpoint, this is a pretty good draft for the Patriots to fill some of these linebacker needs. And again, they very well could. You know what I mean? Like, they're probably looking at it and saying, you know what? Part of the reason they might have released a Bentley is they want to free up a roster spot for a younger player that can come in and perhaps be a fit. And look, we saw this in Tennessee with Vrabel. He is not afraid to draft linebackers. He's also not afraid to spend money on them and bring them in either as free agents or draft them. So, I think it's a situation where it's going to be more of a position of focus than people think. All right, now safety, the Patriots are in an interesting spot at safety because obviously they extend Kyle Duggar last year, gave him big money. Jabril Peppers is still on the roster. They brought in they brought back, I should say, Jalen Hawkins. Safety has been a position of importance for this franchise for a long time. Safety's played a big role in Bill Belichick's defense, especially during the dynasty years. You think of Devin McCourty, you think of Pat Chung. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. They're in an interesting spot to me at safety, John, because I think Pepper's future, even though he signed that extension, is up in the air. Obviously, nothing has happened with him yet, and we don't know if anything will. He could be in pretty good standing with the organization and resume his starter role next season and play a bunch, or he might be on the outs. Who knows? Too early to tell. But I think safety is a position where, again, you could see them take a player, not day 1 or 2, but early, middle, day 3, where they could bring in another safety to add some competition, maybe more of a traditional free safety, which I think they're going to want to play in this scheme. Just some thoughts on the safety position and where could you see them potentially going there?
Yeah, and on your Peppers point, he turns 30 in October, by the way. And I think the key question about safety is Marte Mapu, because I thought last year
and I forgot to mention him, and he's another one. He's going to be going into his 3rd year.
There were only 3 players last year, and this is more of a knock on the coaching staff, but there were only 3 players last year that I thought got noticeably better during the season, that actually really developed. Drake May, Joe Milton, and Marte Mapu. Those are really the only 3 guys. And I think Mapu has the potential to be in that free safety role, which really they haven't had a guy since Devin McCourty.
By the way, not to cut you off, John, you need to say his name the right way. I didn't know how to say his name until Bill Cowher taught me how to say it in one of the highlights he did on the Patriots. It's Martung Mabamapu.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think they haven't had a guy since Devin McCourty retired that can play that kind of free safety, deeper role. And if you look at what they've done at corner, because this relates to it, you have Gonzalez and Carlton Davis on the outside. They're going to play a decent amount of man and a decent amount of press man. So you want that guy in the deep middle of the field. If that can be Mapu, great. Otherwise, the name that jumps out at me, John, and it might be that 4th round pick, but I'd even be willing to reach for him, quote unquote, reach for him in the late 3rd round, Andrew Makuba out of Texas. I think he's the guy. Yeah, and I think his speed, his range, he's the guy. You put him in the middle of that defense with Kyle Duggar underneath in that kind of box safety role. You have Davis on one outside, Gonzalez on the other outside. Slot corner, still a little bit of question. But all of a sudden, you have a really damn good secondary if you do that. So honestly, to me, it comes down to Marte Mapu. I think Mapu can be a pretty good player, but I think I'd still rather have Makuba long-term with his potential. But if the team likes Marte Mapu, then I could see them not really doing much at safety until maybe the 7th round or the undrafted free agent group.
Yeah, safety's not a priority of need. And I agree with you in regards to Mapu's development. But here's my issue with their safety group. They have too many of the same types. That's the problem. Duggar and Mapu are very similar. Okay, Jabril Peppers.
Be nice if they had Julius Peppers.
In his prime, nonetheless. But Jabril Peppers is another one of these guys. Can he screw down and play in a slot as a 3rd safety and cover a tight end or possibly a 3rd receiver? Sure, depending on what you're asking him to do. But Mapu's a bigger body. Duggar's a bigger body. These are not guys that can play over the top if you're rotating coverage. These are not guys that can play over the top as a matchup safety. These are not guys that can cover ground over the top in cover 2. So, in my view, they need to get a guy, if nothing else, try to bring in a guy. Jalen Hawkins can do that. He certainly fits that mold better. But in my view, bring in a younger player there. You got Del Pettis coming back, too, who had a really good year for them last year. Bring in a player there that could step into that role and be that rangy free safety type that can play over the top. I want to see that from them because, as we said, they haven't really had that since Devin McCourty. It would be a nice piece to have because you're going to need that safety with range that can rotate out of a 2-shell into a single high look and play over the top and match up. You need that. And I don't think they have that. I think Mapu is more of a box safety type that could start off in a 2-shell and screw down, pre-snap into a box safety. Again, Peppers can do that. Duggar can do that. But I'm not sure they have enough range and athleticism over the top at that position. And I think you need that. You need that in today's NFL. We've seen it where these 3 safety looks are more common now, but that 3rd safety has to be a guy that can play in the slot and cover people. And that first safety, if you will, that top safety has to be a guy that has range and can play over the top.
Yeah, and I think it's a difference in philosophy among some teams, and I'm curious how Mike Vrabel falls on it. Is he more of a three corner or a three safety guy, right? Because
Great point.
We saw the Patriots under Belichick do both. They had years where they were heavy three corner teams. Then they had years that they were three safety teams quite a bit. And it all comes down to me, John, to that slot position, because you know who your two outside corners are. You know that Duggar and Peppers are going to be two of your safeties. Do you want Marcus Jones as your slot corner, or do you want one of those safeties coming down and you have a deep free safety? So I think where Mike Vrabel falls on kind of that philosophical debate is going to determine what they do here. But if they walk away from this draft with Makuba as a deep safety in the fourth, round, or potentially, later, depending on how he falls, and then you have the remaining safety group, I think you can feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, the other problem you run into in today's game is that there are not a lot of those free safety types left. A lot of these guys now, you're talking about 5'10", $190, $195. Those guys are really a third safety / nickel corner that can play in the slot. They're not really true free safeties, because a true free safety to me, John, has to be a guy that's 6 feet, 6'1", 195 pounds, 190, 195 pounds, that moves well laterally, that can cover ground when he flips his hips. That's a true free safety. A lot of the guys you're seeing, especially in this draft class, they're either in that 5'10", 5'11", $190, 195-pound range, or they're in that 6 foot, 6'1", 200, 210-pound range. And so that's not a guy that traditionally can play over the top, because I do think, and maybe perhaps I'm allowing some of my personal preference on body types to bleed into this, but I do think length is important when we talk about a free safety, the guy that can play over the top. You do need length at that position, because they are going to get into these contested catch jump ball situations, and they need to be able to make plays on the ball, especially if they're, let's say, a too high safety that's on the hash pre-snap, post-snap, he comes off the hash now to cover, let's say, an X receiver on the outside, on the backside of trips. He's got to be able to compete one-on-one in a jump ball situation. So there's not a lot of those guys in this class, which I do think is a little bit of an issue. But nonetheless, as we've said, free safety could be a possibility for them, or safety in general, middle to late day three. Cornerback, of course, was a pretty significant need for this football team coming into the offseason. They've addressed it, of course, by signing Carlton Davis to match him up opposite Christian Gonzalez. But you made a pretty good point. I still think they need another corner. They have Marcus Jones coming back. You have Alex Austin, among others. Del Pettis can play in the slot. I mentioned him earlier. But I still think they could use a third corner. I could still see them going cornerback in this draft. Couple of names there that you like potentially.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a late day three or undrafted free agent thing, because I think with the Davis signing, it's just not really as big a need anymore. Because right now, if you roll out, let's say they go the three corner look, and it's Gonzalez, Davis, and Marcus Jones in the slot, like that should be good enough for you to have success in most matchups. You're not
going to draft a guy to play dime corner for you early.
Right. And I think Alex Austin's a guy I like as a developmental rotational piece. I'm a supporter of Alex Austin. So I think it's going to be a day three. And I feel like this corner class, John, I mean, you correct me if you disagree, it doesn't feel as deep as some of the past corner.
Not as we've seen in years past.
Yeah, like you look at the top with like Barron and Johnson and Amos, like, and Hairston, like those guys can be pretty darn good corners in the NFL. But deeper down, I don't know. I could see like a Kobe Bryant out of Kansas being a guy, but I don't know if he'll fall enough. Because again, it's just, I look at even like Zy Alexander out of LSU too. But like, I just look at this corner group and say, yeah, bring in an undrafted free agent to develop, maybe one of your 3 7th-round picks, but I don't want to expend a lot of draft capital there, because you used a first-round pick on Gonzalez a couple of years ago. Marcus Jones was a late 3rd, early 4th-round pick just a few years ago, and you just spent a bunch of money on Carlton Davis. So I wouldn't really expend a lot of resources here.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either. You mentioned Marcus Jones, Alex Austin. Of course, Isaiah Bolden is still on the roster. Marcellus Dial is still on the roster. So they have some young corners there that have length, that they could perhaps give a longer look to, if you will, in training camp. But you know what? I will say this: we're the only way. Here's my thing: I disagree with you to an extent because cornerback, like here we are earlier talking about possibly taking an Abdul Carter and adding another pass rusher, right? And of course, you bring in Landry, you bring in Chase on, Spillane can play off the edge. You bring in Milton Williams. You've certainly added enough pass rushes. You hope you get back Christian Barmore healthy. But corner is another one of those positions where, because we're living in the era of spread offenses, I do think when I look at the younger corners on the team now, John, those guys haven't developed. Okay, it's too early to say whether or not Marcellus Dial will develop. But has Bolden developed? I mean, they cut him and brought him back. Yeah. He hasn't really developed. We've seen flashes from Alex Austin, but not enough that we can definitively say, oh, yeah, he's your dime corner. He can play in dime packages on second and long or third and long. We haven't seen enough from those guys to definitively say that they can be that. So, and even Marcus Jones to a degree, we know what he can do with the ball in his hands as a punt returner and as an offensive player. But have we really seen enough from him as a corner where we could definitively say, yep, he's a lockdown nickel. He's your third corner. He can play in the slot, especially against crafty route runners. He has the tools physically to match up against those guys. I'm not so sure we could say that definitively. I just don't. I think that my point is this. I think there's a lot of uncertainty there.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
Beyond the top two guys.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And so I'm not anti bringing one in. I just think priority level wise, it's lower on my that's why I said 7th round, undrafted free agent. Because I think Alex Austin can develop into a nice rotational piece. And I think Marcus Jones can be a solid. He's not going to be Jonathan Jones in his prime, but I think he can be a solid slot corner there. And like we said before, some of this is going to come down to where they fall on the philosophical, do you want 3 corners or 3 safety kind of question.
I would love to see them draft Jedi Barron out of Texas, 5'11", $190. He can play on the outside. I think he presents more as a field corner than a boundary corner, but he played on the boundary side a lot at Texas. He has the size, the physicality, a guy that you probably are going to need to take in the 3rd round if you want to draft him. I don't know if he gets to day 3. You mentioned Trey Amos. I like him too. I like his size. I like how fluid of an athlete he is. And he moves real easy, especially in transitions. He flips his hips clean, and he can maintain hip position vertically. Caleb Ransaw is another one out of Tulane. Like him a lot. You mentioned Max Harrison out of Kentucky. So there's some value there. And these guys all tested well at the combine. And I think that's the other part of it. When you look at this cornerback class, you've got some guys in this group that can really run. And the Patriots, I think, are going to play even more man coverage than they played the last couple of years under Vrabel. So you're going to need corners, especially nowadays where teams in the red zone in particular love to run slot fade. You need guys that can get their hands on that guy, reroute him, get in a hip position, and stay in phase on that slot fade. There's guys in this class that can do that because they have the length and the speed to match up. So, again, I agree with you wholeheartedly, John. Is it a position of need? No. You're probably not going to take one the first 2 days. But I do think it probably wouldn't be a bad idea, particularly if you add those extra picks on day 3. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to take one on day 3. Bring in a guy that can compete with Dial, that can compete with Bolden, that can even compete with Adele Pettis, because, again, Del Pettis is a third safety who can play in some of those situations, but he's not a true corner. So they have some needs there. I think it'll be interesting to see how they approach this position because, again, like I said, I'm not sold on what they have after Davis.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. That's a day 3 thing, an undrafted free agent thing, and it's something that, like a lot of positions, it's probably smart to bring in 1 or 2 young corners every year and just see who can develop over time. So, yeah, I mean, they have a 6th round pick. They have 3 picks in the 7th round. I think that's where it makes sense to me. Take a corner around there, sign one as an undrafted free agent, come in and kind of see who can develop. I mean, let's not forget, Jonathan Jones was an undrafted free agent, developed into one of the best slot corners in the NFL. So, like, they've done it. Yeah, and now obviously they don't have Coach Pellegrino there coaching the corners anymore, but it's something that they've been big, late round or undrafted corners quite a bit over the year. And Malcolm Butler obviously being a famous example as well.
Butler, J.C. Jackson, Jonathan Jones. I mean, they first of all, we know how well they did with the undrafted free agents under Belichick. Anyway, they had a run where they had what? I think it was an 18-year run where an undrafted free agent made the team. So it was an unprecedented run, and they especially had success there. You mentioned those three names right there. I mean, well, what more can you say? Jonathan Jones has had a terrific NFL career. We don't need to talk about Malcolm Butler. We all know what he means to the Patriots and Patriots lore. Of course, J.C. Jackson ends up starting here, gets a big contract from the Chargers a couple years ago. So, yeah, to your point, you can definitely address that need either late day 3 or with a priority free agent. A couple of other housekeeping things here before we wrap up the show. Of course, Pro Day week wrapped up here on Thursday with the Holy Cross Pro Day. Patriots had a strong presence last Monday at Boston College's Pro Day. All 32 teams had NFL representation there, whether it be position coaches or scouts. Mike Vrabel moved around a lot, but he spent the most time with the offensive line, John. When the offensive line worked out at the end of the Pro Day, that's the one position he was fixed on. He focused on Ozzie Trapillo, who projects as a second-round pick. Drew Kendall was probably an early day 3 pick. So while he moved around for most of the Pro Day, a lot of his focus that day was on the offensive line. Does that surprise you? Probably not, I would think, given the need, right?
No, and I think you look at this BC program too, right? Bill O'Brien's the head coach. Ernie Adams is involved in that program behind the scenes as well. They got Will Lawling there, who coached with the Patriots a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of NFL eyes and experience on that staff. So I think if they're coaching those offensive linemen, that's something Mike Vrabel can look at. And obviously, I'm not saying that other programs don't, but I think Mike Vrabel can look at that program and say, I can believe in the development of their offensive linemen. And if I want a second round tackle, maybe it is Trapillo. If I want a day 3 interior offensive lineman, maybe it is Kendall, as opposed to maybe some other schools that don't have that level of NFL development on staff. And it's one thing BC, it feels like every 2 or 3 years or so, they have an offensive lineman that goes in the first couple rounds and is a really good pro.
Yeah, O-line you. And again, it didn't, not that it surprised anybody that was there, and there was a large media contingent there. But Trapillo, I thought, had a really good workout. Drew Kendall, I thought, had a really good workout. Cole Burdow out of Merrimack had a really good workout. He's not going to get drafted, but he's certainly a guy that you can bring in as a free agent. But I think, again, it shows you the importance. And, of course, Vrabel did the rounds last week. He went down to Texas the next day. It shows you the importance that they're placing on the offensive line. Doug Marrone was also there. So, I mean, Elliot Wolf was there. They had their key decision makers there. They had their position coach there. Marrone, of course, coached at Boston College last year with Bill O'Brien in an off-the-field role. He spent a lot of time working with those guys, so he knows them well. So he's going to have some really good input. So we talked about this last week. You have a lot of ties between the two programs, and I think those ties are going to help the Patriots better evaluate the players that are there. One other point here before we wrap up, the Patriots Hall of Fame committee is scheduled to get together this Thursday to begin the process on determining who's going to make the Patriots Hall of Fame. Adam Vinatieri was on the ballot, if you will, last year. Obviously didn't get in. Tom Brady got in. They waived everything that they usually do to get Brady in, obviously. Julian Edelman is going to be in his first year of eligibility. So it'll be interesting to see what they do here. Bill Parcells is still in the conversation. You have other Patriot greats as well. But what do you want to see them do here? I'm still going to bang the table for Bill Parcells. I think it's bad that he's not in. I think he needs to get in before he passes. And the fact that he's not in still really bothers me. My guess, though, is, John, you got to think Edelman's a no-brainer, right? First-year eligibility.
So typically they only have one guy get in each year,
yes.
But I think this
a couple years ago they did Scarnecchia and Vrabel.
Right, and I think this would be another year to kind of waive that because I think it should be Vinatieri and Edelman because Edelman, look, Super Bowl MVP, won 3 championships, caught the game-winning touchdown in another Super Bowl, had that iconic passing touchdown against the Ravens in the 2014 divisional round, but really developed into one of the best playoff receivers in NFL history and a consistently Pro Bowl level
And let's
slot
not
receiver.
forget, not to cut you off, the fans decide. I mean, the fans vote on it. They're just going to put out who the finalists are, and then the fans are going to decide it. And you'd have to think again, if it ends up in the hands of the fans, it's going to be Edelman.
Right, and especially the recency part of it too, right? Edelman's more recent, but Vinatieri as well. I mean, they probably don't win the Super Bowl in 2001 because most other kickers wouldn't have made that kick in the Snow Bowl in the divisional round, and the Patriots would have lost that game and not made it there. You kicked 2 game-winning field goals in 2 Super Bowls as well. He was really the best kicker in the NFL for about a 7 or 8 year span with the Patriots as they won 3 Super Bowls. So I think, to me, I know it's typically only one guy per year. This year should be one of those exceptions where it is both Edelman and Vinatieri, because one first half of the dynasty, one second half of the dynasty, both integral parts of 3 championship teams. So I think both of those guys, again, I would waive their usual only one guy and get both of those guys in.
Where do you stand on Bill Parcells getting in?
I am not against him getting in, but it's not. I think the other guys are a higher priority. And I know what Parcells did. He came here, he made them legitimate. He got them to a Super Bowl, which, remember, when Bill Parcells took over, they were the worst team in the league. They were a laughingstock. As I said, legitimized them, got them to a Super Bowl. I thought the way he handled his exit, though, was totally inappropriate, and I think it was detrimental to the team. Now, was it the whole reason they lost the Super Bowl? I think Drew Bledsoe's turnovers and your kickoff coverage had something to do with that, too. But I think he's deserving of getting in, but not over. Like, I wouldn't put him in before an Edelman or before a Vinatieri or before some of these other guys. Because I'm not saying he wasn't important, but for all the success he brought, it was still, 4 years after, 5 years after he left, where they finally started winning Super Bowls 2 coaches later.
I'm going to sound like an a-hole here. How old are you, if you don't mind sharing?
I am 33.
I'm 50. I didn't think you were 33. I thought we were a little closer in age.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Lyons, who knew he was so young.
Yeah. But I think, look, I understand. And people
you know
of
where I'm going with this.
Yeah. And look, people of your generation that saw the Patriots be terrible in the late 80s.
My generation.
I had to. That was too. You put that on a T for me. But
I did.
But I think, and I get, like, I do understand that. Like, and I think there's value in that. And I think he's deserving. And I think, look, if we're being honest with ourselves, and this isn't the nicest thing to think about, as long as Robert Kraft's alive, Bill Parcells isn't going to get in. It's just not.
Nope. You're 100% right.
It's just the animosity there. I think, I mean, we saw it a year ago, right? With the Dynasty documentary. I know they made Bill Belichick look like a villain, the final, 5 episodes of that series. When they talked about Parcells, they still not kind. And that was 30 years later. So I think is, again, and I don't mean to sound morbid, but I just think it's the truth. I think as long as Robert Kraft is alive and in charge of the Patriots, and maybe Jonathan as well, Parcells is not going to get it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And it disappoints me because when we talk about my generation, we recognize what Bill Parcells did for this franchise from a credibility standpoint. To call them a laughingstock, John, is being kind. Okay. And I tell people this all the time. If you lived through 1989, 1990, the famous Rod Russ 1-15 year, then they hire Coach Mack, and then you're thinking, all right, they might be going in the right direction here. Nope, they weren't. As successful as he was at Syracuse, he couldn't turn them around. And then you had the ownership instability. Victor Kiam, you had the Sullivans, of course, Victor Kiam, Orthwine Bush, and then you have Kraft finally buys the team. Of course, he controlled the land around the stadium, buys the stadium, buys the team. He brings stability. But really, what got the Patriots in position, and let's remember one thing here, and I think this is an important point. And Kraft can have all this animosity towards Parcells that he wants, but the bottom line is, if you look at this objectively, Parcells not only turned the fortunes of the franchise around and made them respectable and took him to a Super Bowl, but he also laid the foundation for the Belichick years, because think about how many guys on those first 3 Super Bowls were Parcells, Bobby Greer draft picks.
Yep.
Okay? Yeah. Teddy Bruschi.
Ty Law, Troy Brown,
Willie
right?
McGinnis, Troy Brown. So, I mean, he set the foundation for the first part of the dynasty. You can make that argument. And there have been people that have pushed back on that, saying, no, that was Bobby Greer, blah, blah, blah. I don't care who you think it was. The bottom line is Bill Parcells was the head football coach when those players were brought into the program. And again, we're talking about guys that were key ingredients of those Super Bowl teams. Law, McGinnis, Brewski, Brown, Ted Johnson. I mean, do the Patriots win 3 Super Bowls without those guys? Probably not.
Yeah.
As great as Brady was, they probably don't win 3 Super Bowls without those guys. And those guys were all brought in by Bill Parcells. So I understand Robert Kraft's animosity towards Parcells. It didn't end well. Neither one of them cares for each other. Parcells doesn't care for him either. But I think they need to put their feelings aside. I think Parcells would be willing to accept being placed in the Hall of Fame. I think he would put those feelings aside. It's up to Kraft, but you hit the nail on the head, John. As long as he's alive, I don't think Bill Parcells gets in, and I think that is a travesty. And it's not a generational thing. It's not. At the end of the day, if you're an objective football fan, you can see what Bill Parcells did for this franchise. If you don't, I can't help you. Unfortunately, I get it. We live in a world now where there's recency bias. I mean, there's still people walking this earth that think LeBron James is the greatest player of all time. I can't help you because that means you didn't watch Michael Jordan play. And if you did, you wouldn't think he is. But at the end of the day, I agree. I don't think he gets in as long as Kraft is alive. And that's too bad. That's too bad because I think he deserves to be in. He did a lot for this franchise to put them in a position where they can become what they became later under Bill Belichick. All right, final thoughts here, John, before we wrap it up. We went a little over this week.
No, final thought. It's what, 3.5 weeks away from the draft. Looking forward to previewing more of our positions coming up because as we're going to see, I think coming up, like we talked about the secondary and linebacking group today, everyone talks about left tackle as such a big need, but we hit on running back last week. There's some other under the radar sneaky needs this team has that we're going to continue to get to in the coming weeks. I think your mic cut out. I can't hear you.
So you did a great job this week on Phil Perry's show as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, very much. Always a pleasure to talk football with Phil, and it was a pleasure to be on there as well. And it was funny. We talked on that show too. Some of the same stuff we've been talking about here. Some of the maybe under the radar needs that the Patriots have.
Yep, indeed. Well, great job as always, my friend. And now let's do this again next week.
All right, we'll see you.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Patriots Pulse. For John Lyons, I'm John Sarianides. Till next week, have a good week and stay safe. Peace.